Angela Himsel was raised in a German-American family, one of 11 children who shared a single bathroom in their rented ramshackle house in Indiana. Her memoir is called A River Could Be a Tree, and it received the New York City Big Book Award for a memoir. Stay with us for more on her story. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You have a story that is unique, a story that needs to be heard. A story that people care about. So it can get them to stand up for what they believe in. It can inspire them to change. It can inspire them to take action. It can inspire them to care. Care enough to be the light to someone's darkness. Care enough to extend a helping hand to someone who's down and out. Care enough to call things the way they are and see them for what they could be. Your story can make a difference. Your story can save a life. Your story matters. One story changed the entire world. Your story could do the same. All you've got to do is own your story.
If you're just joining us, welcome to Books with Bridgetti. I'm your host, Bridgetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. Our live stream today is made possible by StreamYard and Beeline Media. If you're watching us on Amazon, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, a very warm welcome to you. This is an audience-centric show and we are monitoring the comments, so do say hello and feel free to interact with us and even ask questions to our amazing author today. We're going to be talking to Angela Himsel. She was raised in a German-American family, one of 11 children who shared a single bathroom. And if you can relate to that story, do join us and say hello. Her memoir is called A River Could Be a Tree, and it received the New York City Big Book Award for a memoir in 2019. She's got an amazing and unusual story, and the title probably threw you off just a tad. But I want her to tell the story because no one else can tell that story better than she does. So without any, let's not waste any more time and get Angela on the show, shall we? Angela, a very warm welcome to you. I'm so glad that you agreed to join us today, and I cannot wait for us to dive into your story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's a big pleasure. So when I read about your story and your circumstances, and then I read the title of the book, and I was trying to think, where does this title come from? Because it doesn't seem to match this storyline. So tell me how you decided on this title.
Well, it's funny because in general, authors don't have anything to do with their titles. They can title it whatever you want. And then so originally, this is a little known fact, not necessarily interesting, but originally they had titled it Twist of Faith because I grew up Christian and then I ultimately converted to Judaism. So Twist of Faith, it was kind of clever. It turns out that a lot of people think that Twist of Faith is a good title. And there are quite a few Twist of Faiths out there, whether books or movies or whatever. So we had to come up with Plan B. And so we went through, honestly, maybe 100 titles. I don't even know how many we went through.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, we went through a lot. I should probably have a list of them and some of the back and forth emails between me and my publisher. And I decided, you know what, let me just go through the book and see if anything jumps out at me after this late date, after having written it and everything. There was a phrase that when I was growing up, the church that I grew up in, which was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian cult, let's just say, and they were very old-fashioned, and men and women had very distinct roles, which did not please me so much growing up in the 1970s with women's liberation and that sort of thing. And so my father, one time I was pushing back against him about men and women and why men got to do this, women couldn't do that. And so my father said to me, look, God created a role for everything in the universe. Men have their roles, women have their roles. What would happen if a river thought it could be a tree? And
oh my gosh,
I know.
that is so
love
amazing.
that, right? I know. And like the thought that a river even has that thought whatsoever. Rivers are over there thinking, gee, I want to be a tree. So I loved that notion. And my father came from the farm world. And so for him, it was a very earthy, a river could not be a tree. Everything in nature has its role.
Very black and white kind of.
Very black and white, and everything and everyone has his or her role. So the title is A River Could Be a Tree, and I wanted to suggest the possibility of change, that things, you don't have to be who you were when what you were born, whatever that happens to be, by the way, not just in terms of religion, it could be anything. It could, right. And I think that this is really the first century, the 20th, 21st century, I think really in the history of mankind, in which many of us have felt that we're entitled to be what we want to be or could be. We might not manage it. It might not actually be as accessible as we think it is, but we think that we should be allowed to, let's just say, right? So I wanted to suggest that kind of new notion of possibility and of change.
I totally buy into that kind of thinking myself. I always use the analogy, like, so what if you traveling from Cape Town to New York City and somebody says to you along the way, hey, I think you kind of missed the turn, you need to go that way. And you say, oh no, my dad said we go this way. But it may not be the road that's going to get you to New York City. So right. Are you going to stubbornly sort of continue on that road, or are you going to be open to change and be willing to take another direction that may get you there a lot sooner?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we're wrong. But just to be able to allow yourself that possibility, it's so freeing to think that, okay, I know that I can't be a ballet dancer. I know that, but like I could take lessons. It's okay, So, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, because, the story is a memoir. So tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in your household, and at what point did you start feeling uncomfortable with what was happening in your life? Like, when did that awakening occur, and what made you realize that things could be different or things could change?
Right. So I grew up, as you said, I'm the 7th of 11 kids, and my family, my parents, they joined the Worldwide Church of God in the 1960s when I was very young. But my mother was Catholic and my father was Lutheran. So all of my extended family was Catholic or Lutheran. We really were the only ones in the county who were in this faith. It wasn't as if we had this huge community or anything like that. It was a small cultish kind of a religion that believed that the world was coming to an end in 1975 at first. And then when it didn't come to an end in 1975, it was because we were at fault. And so I won't go into the whole back and forth of the faith, the religion itself, but it was based on fear that you weren't going to make it into the next world if you didn't adhere exactly to these churches' tenets. And it wasn't a lot of fun, let's just say that. And they had very different customs, religious customs than Christianity as a whole. So, but I really bought into it. If you were raised in a religion, I think that from the time you're 4 years old, then it really is kind of, let's just
part of you.
Yeah, you can call it brainwashing, you can call it socialization, you can call it whatever you want, but it's every week. And so I think that I really did push back against it when I was a teenager, because women were supposed to be men's helpmeets. They were not allowed to do a lot of things that men were allowed to do. We weren't really supposed to get jobs. We weren't supposed to go to college. We wouldn't need it, number one, because Jesus was returning. And number two, women were really supposed to stay at home and take care of the kids. So all of that.
It was also sort of part of the time that we grew up in, I think, that kind of thinking.
Right. It was exactly. I think that Herbert Armstrong was born in the late 1800s, I think, and the person who started this faith, and you could tell the effect that these old white men who grew up in Victorian era, that it really carried through into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But in the 70s, it was different in the States. There was really a lot more of a feminist movement. And so I was kind of caught between, as were many, by the way, not just myself, caught between this new notion that women were in charge of their own bodies and women had a voice versus no, women are not in charge of their own bodies and they shouldn't have a voice. So, but I would say, honestly, that what happened was I went to church one weekend and I was 19, and the minister got up there and said, he said, good morning, brethren. And he said, women, it's because of you that Jesus can't return. It's your makeup, throw it away. And I really thought like this was the oddest thing in the world, that my mascara was standing between Jesus returning. I mean, I had so much power, who knew? So,
it really sounds, I mean, if you think about it logically,
right.
It just sounds so absurd.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I thought Jesus should have better things to do with his time than that. But anyway, I didn't like that they were yet again reaching into my personal space. It's one thing to tell somebody, sort of spiritually how to live, but not how to live, what clothes to wear, what makeup to wear. That's a very personal decision. So I really found that offensive. And I know it sounds kind of, maybe it sounds a little shallow, let's say, but I really think it meant more than that. It really meant that it really did have to do with autonomy. It really had to do with that you're really reaching now. So that kind of sparked my initial questioning and that sort of thing. And then fast forward, I ended up going to Israel my junior year in college. And that was quite the eye-opening experience. And I really think that if you go anywhere your junior year in college, you discover, wow, there's a world out there. There's other people. They're different than I am, similar but different. And I do think that that's one of the most important things in my life personally, has been that opportunity to travel and to meet other people and to
It's amazing how travel opens up a whole new way of thinking, because when you grow up, you're in this little protected space and you don't realize that there's a different world out there with people who do things differently, people who think differently, who may look differently, whose cultures are different. And I think it just really opens up the world for you.
It really does. And when you're 19, which is how old I was, you're sort of open to things in a way that you're not, I think, as you get older. And so when you're 19, it's like you said before, it's like, yeah, sure, I'll go to Israel. Sure, let's go to Egypt for the weekend. Sure, why not? Let's go there. And I think there's something wonderful about that. And hopefully it's something that you can take with you throughout your life. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So when did you decide that you wanted to write about your life story, and how did you, I'm always keen to find out from authors, how did you overcome that sense of vulnerability? Because writing your story, and especially writing a memoir, is about learning to be vulnerable in the way that helps you thrive instead of becoming a victim of your story.
Right.
How did you bridge that gap?
So I have an MA in creative writing, but I always wanted to write fiction. And so I wasn't getting it published. But I was getting a lot of nonfiction published. I was writing essays about sort of juxtaposing my life and my world growing up Christian, and then my current world being Jewish. And none of it was mean or angry. It was supposed to be kind of funny or and maybe also a little bit teaching, not in a pedantic kind of a way, but just like,
Right.
here's a world you might not have known about. Let me introduce you. So I was writing some essays, and then a friend of mine said, you should write a memoir. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just do that. It won't take very long. Well, never ever say it won't take very long, because that's when it takes a really long time. So I really didn't think it would take very long, but it took me over 10 years. I'm going to be really honest, but I wasn't working on it the whole time, but I was working on it. Then I would stop, and then I would do. And it's funny that you said what you say about the vulnerability, because I come from this German background, and vulnerable is not one of the characteristics
It's not a German thing. No,
really. It's like, show my feelings. Are you kidding me? That's personal. I'm not showing my feelings. So it really did take me a lot to overcome being vulnerable on the page, sharing things that might be a little bit uncomfortable. But I made a decision early on when I was writing it, which is, this is my book and it's about me. And the other people who are in this book, I will only write about them, only insofar as it affects me. They have their lives, and I respect their privacy, given the fact that I'm kind of private myself. So this wasn't intended ever to be, I don't feel victimized, but it was never intended to be that kind of a book.
About them, yeah.
No, it was really about my own personal quest. And I would say to find my own authentic self. Because if that's not the person I wanted to be, the way I was raised in Southern Indiana, if that's not the person I feel I am, then who am I? And so I guess that's always the big quest in a memoir, is who am I? And sometimes, it's interesting what you find out as you're writing. It's like, I didn't really realize that about myself until I started writing the book, the things that were important, and how one thing led to another. So I guess does that answer the question?
Yes, it sure does.
Yes. Okay, good.
I want to ask you if you could read us your favorite piece in the book that you think people would find compelling. Do you have the book handy by any chance?
I do. I have the book handy, and it's funny because I've read different parts of it over the past year or whatever. And sometimes I read the opening, which is kind of sets the scene for the whole thing, and sometimes I read portions from the church that would kind of give you like a little taste of what it was like to grow up in that church. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read something else, because this is a program about stories, and it's about how important stories are. And so whether it's my story or somebody else's. So this is a section from my memoir, and it's about the bookmobile. So I was going to read a little bit about that. Did you have a bookmobile?
That'd be nice.
In South Africa? Did you have one growing up?
I did.
You did? Okay. Once a month, the bookmobile visited Boone Township School, the 3-room brick schoolhouse I attended from 3rd to 5th grades from 1969 to 1972. Surrounded by fields, a blacktop road wound past the school, and our isolation was broken now and then by a tractor's hum or a pickup truck rattling along. Although any vehicles were cause for celebration, the green and white bookmobile conjured the free-spirited adventurer I dreamed of becoming. On the days the bookmobile came, I was on the edge of my seat, waiting for our teacher to say, "The bookmobile is here now. Remember, walk, don't run." The row of first graders, then the row of second graders, and finally the kids in my 3rd grade class took turns entering the bookmobile to choose our allotted 4 books. It was dim inside and smelled like old paper. Being inside was like actually entering a well-loved dog-eared book. One of my favorites was a thick book with a picture of a mother and 5 children on the cover. Back in my classroom, I lifted the wooden desktop and placed the book inside. Then, while my teacher taught the story of King Midas, I quietly raised the desktop and immersed myself in the 1880s and the 5 Little Peppers and how they grew. Undisturbed by the sounds of the teacher and the other children, I spent the afternoon with widowed Mamsie and her brood, who said peculiar things like, "My wockety." I made my way through all of Louisa May Alcott's Little Men and Little Women books, as well as Laura Ingalls Wilder and her Little House in the Big Woods series. In 19th century domestic dramas about families who prevailed despite hardship and loss, the authors drew on their own lives to write their novels and thus were more intimate and honest than the Trixie Belden and Boxcar Children books I'd favored. In 5th grade, I migrated to the back of the bookmobile where I discovered the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries and a whole section devoted to the doctor and nurse romances of Cherry Ames and Clara Barton, as well as Donna Parker, Special Agent. Although I identified with the Peppers because they were poor and their lives were filled with adversity, the romances suggested something completely new, that a girl didn't have to choose between a career and a boyfriend. She could have both, a notion the church vehemently decried as impossible, even heretical and anti-God's plan. For 3 years, I moved with the same 9 classmates from one room to another, from one wooden desk to another. But when I opened a book, I could visit Heidi in Switzerland, share the adventures of the Boxcar Children, or time travel to America's 19th century, America's frontier. I imagined exotic places filled with drama, different in every sense from my taciturn, proud, stubborn, stolid German community, who never asked forgiveness and never forgave. They were as uncompromising as a language they still considered their own. In German, the verb was always second in a sentence. There was no way around it, and never try to bend the rules or change them. Obey. I have often thought that the bookmobile contributed not only to my love of reading and passion to write, but also to my belief that the written word equaled possibilities, civilization. I was a dreamy 10-year-old, impatient to grow up and board a plane whose wings would lift me far, far away, but for the moment, books would have to do. And
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
Absolutely captivating. I don't know what it is, but it's love. It's almost mesmerizing listening to somebody read to you. Do you have this book in an ebook, by the way, or an audiobook?
I don't have an audiobook, although I think my publisher is working that. It is on. You can get it on Amazon though as a whatever it is. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I do know it's available on Amazon.
Right.
I just know that there seemed to be a huge movement for people. In fact, I did hear that some people are saying if you listen to the audiobook while you are reading, it just adds another sort of dimension to your reading experience.
Right.
And so I haven't tried that much. Have you ever tried something like that?
No, I have not actually. And I actually don't listen to books very much. Sometimes I will if other people are, but I tend to just like to sit there quietly and read it the old-fashioned way. Exactly.
I know my sister's one of those people as well. She doesn't like the whole audiobook thing. She says she just she prefers the feel of the page and sort of just that,
right.
The idea of sort of physically turning the page as you go along, right, and just seeing all the pages go by. She's one of those people that could read right through the night,
Oh, well.
Yeah. Did you go to did you have, how do you find turning a story into something that's compelling? Because a lot of people write, but not everyone can write a compelling story. Your story is compelling to read. What was that process like for you? So, did you have a lot of iterations, or were you able to just churn it out?
I did. No, I did. I mean, look, it took me a long time. And I think that one of the things that I discovered was that going back to being vulnerable, I would write, let's say 50 pages, and I was in a writing group and I would share it with them. And inevitably somebody would say, but where are you? Where are you in this, Angela? Where are you? And I'm like, I'm right there. I am right there. And I looked at it and I wasn't. I was writing about everybody else and I was writing about ideas and thoughts and whatever, but where was I, sort of emotionally and physically? And you have to really be on every page, and it's exhausting, to be quite honest. And and it doesn't come that naturally to me. So I had to really, when I would go through it, I would actually have to go through and make sure that I was on, maybe not every page, but that it was about me. So even if I was writing about the church, it was still about me.
About your story.
Ultimately, right. It had to be through my lens. And I do truly believe I've met so many people over the years, and you say you're a writer and they say I have a great story, and they do. And they do, but it doesn't necessarily translate into actually writing it. I mean, it is a craft. Writing is a craft, and it is also, it's a muscle. And you could be an excellent storyteller in ninth grade and get all A's, but if you haven't exercised your craft since then, I think you're going to find it tough. You do have to just keep writing and writing and writing, and being ruthless and just tossing it out. The other thing I do, actually, some writers don't do this, but I sometimes read it out loud. After I've finished writing it, I'll read it out loud, because if I find myself bored while I'm reading it, I promise you that the reader is going to be bored if I'm bored. So that sometimes helps me.
I can well imagine, because I do a lot of editing myself, and I find that I'm so much better at editing when I read it loud and I listen back to myself than simply reading lines on the page.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of, does it sound right?
Right.
Because
and storytelling,
what's written on the page doesn't always,
No, right. Storytelling was always a verbal, oral thing. I mean, before it was written down, it was an oral thing that we told stories. And as you're telling a story, if you're talking to your kids or your grandkids and you tell the same story, each time you edit it a little bit better. You make it a little bit better each time you tell that story. And then you could finally write it down. But I do think the act of saying it out loud is kind of harkens back to kind of the original oral storytellers of old, Homer and so on. I like comparing myself to Homer.
I think that's the best way of storytelling, is like when it sounds like grandma's telling you a story. It sounds natural. It flows. It's not overly complicated.
Right.
I was talking to somebody about this the other day, Angela. It was funny enough, and I said, where did we get this culture of emails where it's so formal? It's like nobody in everyday speech, when you say goodbye to somebody, says best wishes.
I know. I know. I think it's a leftover from when you used to write letters and you had to say sincerely yours at the bottom. I mean, we were all taught, dear so-and-so, dear Mr., dear Miss, depending on the heading, and yours very truly at the very bottom. But you certainly don't have to do that.
I know. We've somehow carried that over into our emails, and I keep thinking, why don't we break the cycle? Stop the cycle. And do it the way we normally do. Like if you're sending somebody like a whole chain of emails, you don't have to say dear Angela in every single email. If you're having an email conversation, just go with it.
Jump right in, as if it's a back and forth conversation, right? Exactly.
I know. Totally new culture. So, who was your biggest critic of your book? I'm keen to know.
Critic in terms of didn't like it?
Yeah.
In terms of who didn't like it? If anybody didn't, they haven't told me. Because honestly, they haven't. I mean, and I think that's as it should be. People should keep their negative opinions to themselves. Don't tell me you're anything unkind. Really, I don't mind if you talk about me behind my back. It's fine. I really don't tell me to my face. But I haven't gotten any critiques in terms of, it's interesting because people who grew up in the church that I grew up in, who have read it, who have also left the church, for example, I've heard from them on Facebook and various places. And
after they read your book.
Yes. And I did an event in Ohio, and a woman who I had known in the church, and this is going back over 40 years now. I haven't seen her in over 40 years, but she's a friend on Facebook. She knew I was going to be there. She showed up. She hugged me so hard and said it was so important to read that book because it validated what she had always felt herself, but maybe didn't put into words. And so if there's others who have not liked it, they haven't said anything to me. And I think that even though my life took a different trajectory than a lot of them did, I think that they can still relate to, again, going back to the title, change, and the possibility that a river could be a tree, that you can become something other than what you've been told that you have to be.
I think that's amazing. And, I think a lot of authors, when they're writing something that's so deeply personal, may have a fear of what people may think or they may judge them. But the thing is that we often are, almost every author has been surprised how their story have ended up inspiring somebody else. And it's given somebody else a voice that they didn't know. They couldn't get the words out themselves, and people come to you and say, I felt the same way. I just couldn't put it on paper.
Right. I know. And I think I would like to hope and believe anyway that that's why I read the part from Bookmobile, that stories do have this ability to transport you beyond your own circumstance. And so even though I had nothing to do with the 5 little peppers and how they grew, I mean, it was 100 years later and they were not my people, but I identified. And I do think that that is the power of art in general, whether it's music or literature or whatever, is that you can identify and find your way into their work. And I would never say that, I mean, I understand that my story isn't everybody else's story, and nor should it be. And everybody has his or her own story. But I do feel pretty strongly that, I mean, that is the whole point of literature, is that you're going to take me someplace I've never been, but I'm gonna find something there that I can identify with. It's some way.
Angela, what's next for you? Are you working on another novel? Is it on the cards?
I am working on, well, I'll tell you, I started working on a novel, fiction, because I said I'm sick of myself. I don't want to write about myself anymore. I'm done. I don't want to write about myself. So I started writing a historical novel about King David's wife, Michal. And the reason is that, I know, right? Michal is the only woman in the Bible that it says loved a man. It never says Sarah loved Abraham or Rebecca loved Isaac or anything like that. It says, and Michal loved David. And that's kind of interesting because the Bible doesn't mince its words. It doesn't waste words. So why does it say that? So I was very interested in who Michal was. And so obviously she didn't leave any books behind herself, so I have to make it up. And so I am working on a novel. But I am doing a hybrid, and I am also including my own personal things in with the novel. So I'm really having fun, and it remains to be seen how well it's done, but I'm really having fun with it, I have to say. And it's not at all about, it's not at all about growing up in the church and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
So
when will it see the light of day?
Oh, please, God, I don't know. I mean, I haven't finished this draft. It's writing is a long process. I haven't finished this draft. And I think I mentioned to you that I am a grandma. I have a delicious, gorgeous little 5-month-old granddaughter. And I've been very busy, being involved in her life, which is so fun. But I am writing. And I'm hoping to finish this draft this summer and then send it to my agent and then, that. So it could be 2 years. Yeah. But I hope so.
Well, as much as writing is fun, grandchildren take precedence.
Yes, they do. They are, as my daddy would say, they're only young once. So, yeah.
Absolutely. They grow up so quickly. I mean, look at our own children, so.
I know, exactly. I know. And I don't have to get up with this one in the middle of the night. So I get the best of all possible worlds. She's on such good behavior with me. She's happy and can't wait to see me. It's all good.
I know my late mother-in-law used to say, it's the right of a parent to correct, but the privilege of a grandparent to spoil. So
nice.
That's our privilege.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Angela, thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and I look forward to doing this with you again sometime. So thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too. Bye.